All right, here we are at the Louisville Slugger Museum. There's the giant novelty bat behind me, and we'll go ahead and scan this with the Eagle and the Raven and see how this looks between both of those. And we're going to check the Raven out. Again, we're going to plug the power into USB-C and power it up. Yeah, you can actually see how bright the screen is in this shot where there's not much glare from the sun behind me. So I'll go ahead and check the exposure. Yep, exposure still looks good on outdoor and as dim as possible. We'll click save. Yeah, I'll go ahead and click start. Call this Slugger Raven 01. And the screen is way easier to type on than the Eagle screen because it's wider. Click save, and the exposure is still good. So click save again. It's doing its whole synchronized thing. And we can start collecting. It gives us a little 5-second countdown. Again, I think to collect some data, so it makes a denser point cloud in the beginning, so stuff to lock onto later for the slam or whatever. And you can see location is this little T where these two things intersect right next to the stop sign or the sign over here. So that's where I'll close the path later. And here we go. I'll go ahead and do the chest level pass first on everything. Go ahead and look up to capture more of the top of the buildings. So I'll go regular and then look up and tilt up more. And keep doing that as I walk down the street.
And just a heads up, while I'm not saying anything in the video, 3DMakerpro did send me this scanner to review. However, they haven't seen the video before I put it out, so these are all my honest opinions. And if I happen to get a discount code, check out the video description for that. Okay, so I wasn't actually going to upload this video. Frankly, I thought it was too boring to watch after I edited it together. But I had at least one person ask to see how I actually performed the scan, so I'm uploading it. Mostly in its entirety, but I am taking out parts where the scanner's booting up, or when the screens just aren't doing anything between whenever I click one button and the other when the scanner's saving between different menus. Basically stuff that would cause people to click away, or at least stuff I would click away for. I did make a way more in-depth video on how to use the Raven for content creation, and that video focuses a ton on the software side of things. And it also goes over the Eagle from 3DMakerpro on the software side of things, but those two scanners are basically the same when it comes to the software. And I'd also think those videos will work for most any LiDAR scanner, as long as you can export a .las or .e57 file. Oh, and if you want to see the end results of these scans, click the video description or the pinned comment, and I'll have a link to a Google Drive where you can download these assets and play around with them for yourself. All right, back to the video where I'm scanning the Louisville Slugger bat in downtown Louisville, Kentucky.
So now I have the opposite side of the street. And we'll do the same thing, look at the bottom of the building and then tilt up to try to gather more data at the top.
All right, well, I guess I'll keep talking since this is really boring without any sort of voiceover. So I started scanning this street after scanning a facade in another part of Louisville. And interestingly, at the facade, I did that earlier in the day, and at least with this version of the Eagles, or rather Ravens firmware, you couldn't really get the Raven to be as a shutter speed as needed. Basically, the whole scene was a little bit too bright, but I would think a firmware update's going to fix that because, I mean, regular mirrorless cameras, you can like bring the shutter speed all up to like 1/8,000th of a second or something. So I assume that's just a firmware update. But as you can see, I'm basically just moving the scanner up and down as I walk along the streets, trying to get the LiDAR some more information up towards the top of the building, since the Raven does have a more narrow beam pattern than the Eagle. I don't know how well it worked. I mean, the scan turned out pretty well, I guess. Yeah, you can see me right there trying to decide which side of the tree I'm going to go on. I decided to go more towards the inside of the street because I was going to go do another scan afterwards with the Raven put up like 15 feet in the air on a painter pole, and I figured it can get more of the wide angle shots of the street, or basically, I don't know, a more sparse point cloud to tie everything together with. Who knows if that really helps or not. But I do think having the Raven up higher on a second pass does make the point cloud a little more dense up top than just doing one single pass at eye level or chest level. And here I am going back towards the start of the scan to close the loop where I started from. You see I'm getting some of the crosswalk sign. I wanted to see how that turned out in the final scan. But yeah, I'm going back towards the start of the scan to close the loop. Although I'm not going to stop the scan at that point. That's just where I'm going to raise the Raven up to the top so that way it gets detail higher up. Yeah, and on these scans I basically pointed the Raven forward towards the buildings closest to where I'm scanning from. I do a little different technique whenever I raise the scanner up higher. I do include a sample of the scan, again, in the video description, Google link. And here I am raising the scanner, or tilting the scanner way up towards the sky, trying my best to get the top of the Louisville Slugger bat. And here's me stopping where I started the scan. Now I'm going to let it get some data for a few seconds, and then I think I'm going to raise it up some more. Let's see if I actually do that. Yeah, there you go. Raising it up. I don't know, kind of interesting. The rumor had it that the Louisville Slugger bat was basically a chimney for the building, but whenever I saw some aerial photos of it, there doesn't seem to be a chimney in there at all, so I assume that was just kind of a local legend. Yeah, raising the Raven up, or the Eagle up for that matter, is not particularly fun. It's definitely more top heavy up high. Here you can see what I'm doing with the scan. This time I'm walking down the street, but I am panning the scanner back and forth while trying to avoid getting hit by cars. I did this on, I think, a Sunday in hopes that there were going to be less cars downtown, which there seemed to be less cars than normal downtown. It was also, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 o'clock at night, although I'm not entirely sure anymore. But man, that thing looks like it's up crazy high, doesn't it? It's no fun putting it up that high. And I think the USB cable that's attached to the Raven powering the Raven is like a 15-foot cable, and it's basically attached to a backpack, so the cable was pretty well stretched, so I think this thing really is 15-ish feet up from my lower back, so I would guess the scanner is probably really 17-ish feet up in the air. That way, I guess even if there's a box truck or something, it can probably go over it. And you can see my scan pattern's not particularly consistent. I'm going from side to side on the street, I think, in an attempt to kind of avoid trees, and I basically didn't want to make 2 separate loops. I don't really know why I was going side to side, other than maybe I think I was trying to avoid trees, because if you look at on the right side of the screen, I would have to do something to avoid those trees, so I decided I'd just zigzag on the street to avoid trees. Again, probably not the most consistent way to gather data, but I figured I would pan the scanner back and forth left to right in an attempt to just fill in the top of the buildings. I knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but this had to be better than doing just a single pass at eye level. I do include a sample of the scan, again, in the video description, Google link. Also in the main video, there is a rendering from Blender of the scan if you want to check that out. That's probably more interesting than watching me scan this if anyone's even still here. And you can see the van in the lower left corner of the screen. Again, that's why this scanner is higher up, to avoid vehicles that are parked and stuff like that. And also to hopefully see over some of the smaller trees. If you are scanning like this, just make sure you avoid power lines and stoplights and all that sort of stuff. And here I am going back towards the start of the scan. You can see I didn't go nearly as far out past the end of the block because I did it when the scan was lower. That's because I was going to have to duck under the trees if I went further out, and I just didn't want to deal with that. I was already fairly nervous having the scanner up this high, especially after scanning earlier in the day. I was just getting tired. And here I am, bringing the scanner in to get a little more detail in areas that I likely missed on the first pass of the building. I guess I got enough data there, so going back around towards the start of the location. Let's see, so I'm going to probably put it down and then lower the scanner to the ground. It's always a relief to actually start bringing this thing down. I try to be fairly gentle when, I guess, de-telescoping it, if that's even a word. I don't think it'd hurt if you weren't particularly gentle, but I'd rather be softer with it than more.
Alright, so that's the end of the Raven scan at the Louisville Slugger bat. I'm going to collect data for a few more seconds at the end of the closed loop, and we'll hit stop. So you can actually see, yeah, and the path looks pretty straight. You can see the pinkish purple line is where I walked, and then yeah, I guess the green stuff's higher up and the blue is the road, maybe. So click finish, and we can shut down. And now we will try the Eagle. Alright, so now we're on the Eagle at the large Louisville Slugger bat. So I'll go ahead and turn this on. I don't know if you can see it. It shows up good, but I mean, we're in the shade right now. It is definitely darker than the Raven for the screen. We'll go through the settings on the camera and adjust the brightness. We use auto exposure, and yep, that looks good. We'll click save. And we'll go ahead and name this file. So we'll scan. We will connect the GPS and rename this to Slugger Eagle 01. It is harder to actually get the right keys on the Eagle since the screen is more narrow than on the Raven. But GPS for RTK or PPK is going to connect, so we'll click save. Click scan, and you can see we do have the antenna for PPK on the Eagle. I don't know if you can actually see, it's trying to connect to the GPS satellites. Again, it's dimmer than on the Raven, but you can still make it out pretty easy in the shade. If you're in bright sunlight, you can still make it out, but man, it's tough. And we're connected, so say continue, let it capture some data for a moment, and we'll start this scan the same as we did for the Raven. And we'll go ahead and tilt the LiDAR scanner up so it gets like the top of the bat also. And we'll walk along the street, tilting the eagle as we go. I'm getting further away from the buildings when possible, so that way I can see up higher. Okay, I'm going to cut the video off here because the eagle is basically the exact same as the Raven scan. It's just a different scanner. So I'd just be repeating what I did with the Raven. But I will show you how these scenes look with regular video from an Insta360 Ace Pro 2, so that way you can compare them to the Gaussian Splats. I'm going to link in the video description and pinned comment so you can compare how live video looks compared to, again, the Gaussian Splats. But with that, I'm going to wrap the video up and let myself talk a little more on camera as I go through the live video. But if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to reach out, and hopefully this video helped you out. Sorry I don't have a third-person view for what this scene looks like of me using the Raven and Eagle. The camera would be too easy to walk away with if I left it unattended out here, but you can see what this location kind of looks like and how it will look compared to the point cloud and possibly 3D Gaussian Splat. You can see if this little neon sign shows up. Looks kind of interesting. Here's some other sign. Says Kentucky Mirror Plate Glass. I would guess this thing's like 10 feet tall maybe. Here's the Fraser Museum. Probably looks better on video than the Gaussian Splat or LiDAR cloud, but I mean, you're pretty much limited to whatever angle I'm capturing right now. You can't actually look around it later, so we'll see how this turns out compared to the Gaussian Splat and LiDAR scan. Here's a horse. We'll see how that turns out compared to the buildings. Probably won't be as detailed as the buildings. Probably won't be super detailed on the Splats. You can see how this car turns out. Smaller than a regular car now. Here's the Louisville Slugger. Kind of pull-in area where you can drop people off. And the Bat. It'll be interesting if you can make out what these words say in any of the scans. It says Big Bat Bourbon. I thought this building looks pretty cool. It says it's Michter's Distillery. It's got a cool turret up top. So let's see if the scans turned out any good or not. Scooters. And once again, here's the Bat from down low in the road. Alright, well, that was the end of take 10, and I think that's the end of shooting for today, Sunday, March 29th, 2026. Back in Ray's studio, let's check out the Eagle first. And here we are with the Eagle. I'm going to walk down the street and see how the Bat looks. Surprisingly, I see a lot more floaters around in the sky with the Eagle version of the Gaussian splatting. I don't know if they're showing up very well on the preview here, but I will try to upload these files so you can see for yourself. So here's the Eagle one. Let's go ahead and move in on the Bat some more. Walking up to the Bat. You can see a bunch of kind of floaters here on the ground. The ground doesn't look particularly detailed. The brick, however, does look nice. Mostly nice. I mean, you can definitely see what's going on, but, you know, maybe not the cleanest Gaussian splat. But the, you know, streets do look pretty nice. Yeah, overall, you can easily tell what's going on. Let's check out the Raven version now. So here's the Raven version I've processed previously.
Go into Gaussian Splat and preview. And we'll start at the end of the street again. The first thing I noticed right away, the stoplights look way better. And as I mentioned before, the exposure on the Raven actually did look pretty correct in camera here as the sun was going down. You can see there's like basically no floaters in this scene at all, which, I mean, I'm pretty blown away by how good this looks. If we go up to the bat, higher up isn't quite as detailed as down low, but these are using really wide angle cameras, so I don't really expect to get a bunch of detail from something that's like 80 feet up in the air. But if we look down, this is pretty surprising. You can actually see details in the brick down here, whereas on the Eagle, the ground kind of fell apart. If we look at the bricks over here, man, they look pretty darn perfect. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty blown away the first time I saw this Raven scan. Like, this looks, if not photorealistic, incredibly close to photorealistic. Like, I would be happy showing this to anybody. Going down the street some more. Let's check out this horse at the end of the street. Yeah, I mean, that looks pretty good. You can see the names of things in the windows. You can read everything. You can read the text. Scroll back around and go down the street the other direction. And again, I'll go ahead and upload these to the Chimney meta site so you can check these out for yourself. But this is, again, just a quick preview in case you don't want to check that out. Yeah. So here's the Raven. Yeah, looks really, really good. And I don't know if I could even make this Gaussian splat with a regular camera. I just don't know if it would process properly or not, because I think the Raven takes the LiDAR data and attaches the Gaussian points probably to the LiDAR point cloud. So that's really cool. Okay, now that we've done that, I think that when you have the proper exposure with the Raven, at least for this particular scan, the Raven turned out better. So now that we've compared the 3D Gaussian splats, let's go ahead and check out the LiDAR scan data in Blender between the Raven and the Eagle. Here's the render for the Eagle. We're going down the street. You can see that the LiDAR point cloud is very dense. However, check out those light posts on the left side of the frame next to the bat. You can see that the middle of them is missing. That's because the LiDAR portion of the Eagle doesn't pick up black particularly well, especially if it's glossy. But you can see everything looks pretty darn sharp when it does pick up the data. You can't quite make out text on any of the signs or the bat. And you also see floating spheres throughout the scene. That's because I didn't do any point cloud thinning. I wanted to show you what the results actually look like from the Eagle. And now let's check out the Raven. I'll do a side-by-side comparison in a moment, but the first thing I noticed is that the image looks a little more fuzzy. However, the light posts do show up completely, so it does pick up black better from the LiDAR scan. You can actually almost make out the text on the bat, which is interesting. You couldn't do that on the Eagle. However, as I said earlier, the image is a little more fuzzy than the Eagle, and the point cloud isn't nearly as dense. There also does seem to be less noise in the sky from the Raven, which is interesting. But once this finishes up in a few more seconds, we'll go ahead and compare the two starting frames from the Eagle and the Raven. So here we go. I've got the Eagle on the left side of the screen, and notice how sharp the buildings look compared to the Raven. You can also see that the Eagle's LiDAR range and field of view has some advantages. In the 4-story building on the right, you can see that the Eagle's point cloud is still pretty dense. Whereas if we look at the Raven, notice how much more sparse that is. And then if we reframe the image and check out the bat that's poking up above the tree, the top of the bat actually looks pretty well defined on the Eagle. Whereas on the Raven, you can still tell there's something poking up, but it's kind of hard to tell what that is. Now, to be fair, no one's actually ever going to be checking out these two LiDAR scanners side by side, so if you'd only ever seen the Raven, I don't think you'd realize what you're missing with the Eagle. And as I said before, the Raven actually does have some advantages picking up dark objects like the light posts that are next to the Slugger bat, whereas the Eagle really does struggle with reflective dark objects. So that was actually really surprising that the Raven picked that up better. But in my opinion, with at least this version of the Raven's firmware and this version of Ray Studio, the Eagle does create a sharper LiDAR scan. However, the Raven does have one more trick up its sleeve. Remember that the Raven not only does LiDAR point clouds, it also does 3D Gaussian splats, or 3D GSs. And the results from the Raven on the 3D Gaussian Splats were actually better than the Eagle for this scene. So what if we could take that 3D Gaussian Splat data and somehow turn it into a point cloud? Here is the 3D Gaussian Splat render of the Raven. As we're going down the street, check out how sharp the buildings on the right side of the screen are, and also how sharp the light posts are right next to the bat. Those are incredibly sharp. You can even see the text on the screen for the bat. And as we go away from the bat, look at the trees. You can see the branches on the trees, which you couldn't see branches on the LiDAR data, so that is very impressive. Now I've put all three renders on the screen at the same time. In the upper left corner, we've got the Raven 3D Gaussian Splat render. On the right's the Raven LiDAR render. And in the bottom is the Eagle LiDAR render. And as we're going through the scene, I would probably pause the scene occasionally to see what the strength of each technique actually is and the strength of each scanner. You'll notice that I have a black background for these scenes. Well, in just a moment, we will put a white background on it, and the white background will give you a better idea of just how dense each point cloud is. If you're seeing a bunch of white behind the scenes, that's the background poking through the point cloud. So the more white you see, the less dense the point cloud is for that scan. And everything again is in the same spot. The Raven 3D Gaussian Splats in the upper left, the Raven LiDAR scans on the right, the Eagles on the bottom. And you can see that the Raven 3D Gaussian Splat is the least dense. However, we did do the statistical outlier filter on that one, which did remove quite a bit of point clouds. But if we didn't do that, you'd see a ton of floating points in the sky. Then we'll play this in reverse one more time just so you can check it out from the opposite direction. One thing that really did surprise me with the 3D Gaussian Splat point clouds is look at the road. You can really see how well the road markings show up, whereas on the LiDAR data, they show up somewhat, but not particularly well. But again, the LiDAR data is more dense than the 3D Gaussian Splat data, so everything's kind of a series of compromises. And I don't know if I said this, but what I do for a living is shoot and edit video, and video camera technology has been out forever, but each type of video camera has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. So there's no perfect video camera, and as you can see in this comparison, each LiDAR scanner also has its own strengths and weaknesses. Straight out of the Eagle, it does make a more dense point cloud, and it is sharper than the Raven's point cloud. However, the Eagle does cost over twice as much as the Raven. But from kind of hacking together a workflow with 3D Gaussian Splats for a point cloud render, we can get results that somewhat match the Eagle, at least in terms of sharpness, albeit at the cost of point cloud density.